The Smash Bros. Community is nothing if not a hotbed for discussion, and one of the most commonly debated topics is character representation. This idea of wanting the roster to reflect which franchises within Nintendo, or gaming as a whole, are most important has caught on big time in recent years among the fans, despite it not being what Sakurai and the devs are aiming for, but that's its own can of worms. This idea has grown so widespread among the Smash fanbase that it spurs vocal reactions when a franchise gets more than what is deemed its fair share, or when one that means so much to its fans has gone a long time without a newcomer. Which can happen for multiple reasons. Sometimes a series goes dormant for a while and becomes lower priority in Smash through little fault of its own. Sometimes a series goes dormant for a while but wakes up, only to just retread old ground that doesn't make use of any standout elements the Smash roster hasn't tapped into yet. And sometimes a series keeps having its new entries hit shelves at just the wrong times for its new entries to be viable options. But the newcomer drought of The Legend of Zelda may be the most notable. Circumstances great and small have kept it from getting a newcomer since Brawl, and its last non-derivative newcomer showed up in Melee. While this doesn't mean a Zelda newcomer has to happen to balance the reps, this cold streak has led to more and more fans hoping we see someone from such a storied franchise make it in again, especially with how overwhelmingly well received its latest main entry and the characters therein have been, even those that may seem like they're just new takes on someone who's been around for a long time. This is Challenger Approaching, where we take a character who isn't playable in Smash yet and go deep into detail on what they could be like if they got in for real. Our challenger this time just so happens to be someone who could break her series' long drought. But just what could she do that help her stand out amongst her legendary peers? Impa! Impa is a name with a legacy as long and complicated as the series she calls home. You see, just like there have been many incarnations of Link and many princesses named Zelda, there have also been many Impas. They've taken on different appearances throughout the ages, some elderly, some more youthful and combat-ready, some, distinct. They've also played many roles, ranging from confidants to caretakers to protectors, their core purpose always to support the Zelda of their era. This particular Impa, though, is a unique case. We first got to know her in Breath of the Wild as a very old member of the Sheikah clan, helping refresh Link's memory after his 100-year absence and inform him of what he can do to stop Calamity Ganon from breaking free of his seal. While we knew she was present alongside Link, Zelda, and the champions, we never got to see her in action in Link's memories, or see her at all. But that changed just recently. The prequel spin-off, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, gave this Impa from a century prior a major role as Zelda's royal advisor and bodyguard, and allowed her to put her finely honed skills as a Sheikah warrior on full display against hordes of enemies. She plays a prominent role in the story from the very beginning, and she's even playable starting partway through the game's very first chapter. This surprise of a game not only gave Zelda fans another chance to experience Breath of the Wild's characters all over again, it also puts Impa herself in an interesting situation regarding Smash. This new game not only makes her relevant at just the right time, it depicts her in a combat-capable form we hadn't seen prior that makes her fully capable of operating in Smash's environment. While we do have a fighter already who uses Sheikah techniques, Impa's moveset in Age of Calamity blends in elements of the ancient technology unique to Breath of the Wild for something very distinct even compared to the two ninja we currently have. And while Age of Calamity is technically just a spin-off title, and Smash has avoided pulling newcomers from such games so far, this is a spin-off that tells what is, more or less, a canon story with direct input from the series' creative directors. Which means Impa's true chances are difficult to actually assess. On one hand, we don't know if Age of Calamity is a game a new fighter could be pulled from, or even just the core elements of their moveset. On the other, the increased gravitas of this particular game may make Sakurai and Nintendo less wary of relying on it for a moveset. And on the third hand, don't think too hard about that, there's the recent Spirit event that got announced as this very video was mid-development. Of all times for it to happen. While we saw from Min Min that being a spirit isn't inherently a deal breaker, this event happening right now means that to get in, Impa will probably have to feature prominently in this form in the Breath of the Wild sequel somehow, luck out and have said sequel get looked at for a deliberately recent first-party newcomer like Fire Emblem Three Houses was, have a decision of who to pick not happen until after this Spirit event was planned out, and beat out all other competition. It's not impossible, but it's definitely an uphill battle. Still, regardless of how likely she might be, this version of Impa's got a very interesting set of abilities going on here that make her a standout choice, if she got the chance to be. So, let's see if we can do her justice. Let's take everything this character has to offer and see just what Impa could be like in Smash. Her default appearance can be lifted directly from Age of Calamity with little issue. A spin-off it may be, but apparently the character designs had input from the Zelda developers, so we can assume this really is how Impa looked 100 years before Breath of the Wild. She's decked out in pretty typical Sheikah attire, which doesn't sound like it fit a highly skilled warrior, but real-life ninja did often disguise themselves as ordinary commoners when on missions. Impa's choice of weapon is the Kodachi, a type of Japanese short sword, or a Sheikah short sword in universe. This will give any of her moves that use it, which is most, a minor amount of disjoint to their hitboxes to help her space attacks a little better. Though it is a short sword, so we're talking something closer to Meta Knight range, not something she can zone with. There are 3 tiers of Kodachi that Impa can obtain in Age of Calamity, and any could work in Smash. I'd personally give her a devoted Kodachi, the strongest of the 3, since Smash tends to give fighters from adventure or RPG games their ultimate or signature weapons. Impa's animations also have a strong point of reference from the source material alone, a perk of being from a modern game with a relatively similar art style. While trying to lift everything from Age of Calamity would be too limiting, using it as inspiration gives Impa a strong starting point. We could even work in elements of Breath of the Wild's visual style as specific effects, like giving her attacks the same kind of motion trails, or having her disappear in a puff of smoke and paper talismans for her roll dodges. Impa's alternate colors could use 2 sources as inspiration. One is all of the allies and acquaintances she's fought alongside. Something based on one of Zelda's outfits in particular just makes sense considering the 2 are such close friends. Then a few other palettes can come from all the other Impas from throughout the series' history. Some nice color choices here. Speaking of choices, I wouldn't mind if you chose to subscribe if you like what you've seen so far, and click the notification bell so YouTube will bother to tell you when a new video is out. Anyway, now let's lay out Impa's stats and other attributes and see exactly what could go into how she'd fight. So, the big thing here is we don't want her to play exactly like the 2 ninja-like characters we already have. The whole point with a newcomer, who isn't an echo fighter, is for them to do something new that makes people want to try them out. So we want a distinctly different take on the usual ninja trappings. Fortunately, the things Impa does in Age of Calamity could work toward this perfectly. While the core of her fighting style would involve staying in motion and carefully poking at opponents like you'd expect, Impa would also bring in some dynamic elements that alter her moves and change her game plan based on the situation. Set things up right, and not only do her default options become more effective, some even gain new uses. It'll make sense when we get there. Looking at the exact numbers, Impa has a pretty typical humanoid build, which is enough to be above average in a game with so many non-human or cartoony characters. Her default stance and run animation would make her play as if she was a little shorter on the ground, but it wouldn't be as extreme as it is with Greninja. She is solidly lightweight though. Dressing light and focusing more on avoiding attacks means she can't take too many hits when someone does catch her with something. A weight value of 86 makes her slightly lighter than Greninja, but quite a bit heavier than Sheik. As you'd expect from a ninja-like character, Impa's mobility is good to great in every stat, though her fall speed has its pros and cons. This helps her position herself to her liking more easily and allows for cleaner movement mix-ups that play right into how she wants to fight. She may not be as fast as the speediest characters on the roster, including her ninja counterparts, but she's got more than enough going on elsewhere to make up for it. This all-around movement also ties into her recovery. While it may seem merely above average, Impa can mix up how she recovers quite easily and get that much more mileage out of it. It'll make sense later. Meanwhile, Impa's damage output varies a lot based on how things are going for her. The previously mentioned dynamic elements put emphasis on momentum and force her player to use different solutions based on how powered up she is. A lot of her attacks are pretty underwhelming in their base forms, and it forces her to choose when to go in carefully or she'll end up taking trades that are not in her favor. But just like in Age of Calamity, Impa can really ramp things up once she gets the ball rolling, with much improved damage per hit combined with consistently effective combos. Having momentum really helps too, since her actual frame data is surprisingly hit or miss, and several of her attacks are slower to come out than you'd expect from a character like this. She can't overwhelm opponents through constant attacks the way Sheik can. It has to be more tactical. Her kill power is also pretty touchy, as her best moves for ending stocks are either laggy and reliant on reading your opponent, or are precise and hard to hit with if you aren't powered up. Choosing the right options for the situation is key. To delve into Impa's moveset, first we need to go over a very important part of it, a unique mechanic that defines how she'd fight. Just like in Age of Calamity, Impa would have the means to create clones of herself made of the same solidified light as ancient Sheikah technology. Up to 3 clones can be in play at a time, and the more she has, the more her moveset gets powered up. While the exact enhancements would vary on a move-by-move basis, the general pattern is as follows. Clone number 1 adds another hitbox to the attack at the same time as the main one, basically giving it more range. Clone number 2 adds a second hit after the main one, and clone number 3 adds a second hitbox to the second hit that is stronger than the one made by the second clone. Impa's heads-up display would show how many clones she currently has, and the clones themselves would follow behind her as after images when she moves, teleporting into place when she attacks, and then back to behind her afterward. Makes it easier to keep track of that way, and it still fits thematically since the clones are just constructs with no actual consciousness of their own. Keep all that in mind as we start with Impa's basic attacks, beginning with a jab combo where she slices from right to left with her Kodachi, then a second time from left to right, then transitions into a rapid flurry of slashes faster than the eye can see. This move combines her first 2 weak attacks in Age of Calamity with her default follow-up after activating a stasis rune. While I don't intend for this moveset to represent Age of Calamity, I think we can safely assume that any move not requiring an Elemental Rod or Sheikah Slate rune, including follow-up moves performed after a rune is used, is something Impa can canonically do. By default, this jab would be pretty unremarkable at base level, not hitting until about frame 5 and for mediocre damage. But the more clones you have, the more damage it deals and the bigger its hitboxes get. Fair warning, not every move here will be a direct lift from the game. For Impa's forward tilt, I have her just swing her Kodachi downward in front of her. It's got solid vertical reach since the hitbox starts at head height, but it doesn't reach as far forward as tilts from actual sword fighters would. Though if you have a second or third clone, they will appear slightly in front of you and give you a little more reach that way. For her up tilt, Impa swings her Kodachi above herself in an arc from front to back, with a slight spin during the animation so it feels more natural. It's a decently quick disjointed anti-air that puts your opponent above you. It won't kill and its combo use is limited, but its reach is good, and having clones makes it last unusually long for a tilt. Then Impa's down tilt has her hold her Kodachi out sideways and thrust it forward, sharp side first. With fairly quick startup and a fast animation, its pedestrian damage is compensated by its low base knockback that pops opponents up and slightly forward for easy follow-ups. It gets even better if you have multiple clones, as adding a second hit gives it more chances to poke through damaged shields. And now we're finally back to adapting actual animations with Impa's dash attack, lunging ahead with a slash that unleashes a short-ranged energy wave in a style inspired by her 5th weak attack, without the teleport at the start. An effective burst option to catch landings or punish whiffed attacks, having multiple clones makes it last even longer than her other moves since clones 2 and 3 will wait until after the beam has disappeared before adding their own. Next, let's add some style to this substance. Impa's forward smash is a 2-hit move based on her 3rd strong attack, having her pause briefly, perform a forceful horizontal slash, pause briefly again to charge the blade with ancient energy, then perform a 2nd slash powerful enough to leave a ray of blue light in its wake. With good damage and great range even without any clones, though having them certainly helps, its knockback is high enough to be a go-to finisher if you have the chance to hit it. Emphasis on if, since it does have more startup than you might expect on such a stealthy character. Impa's up smash comes from her 4th strong attack, summoning a giant talisman above her head that explodes in ancient light. Fairly basic normally, aside from being another 2-hit move, but if you have any clones on hand, they'll warp to above you on either side, each firing a laser into the talisman the moment it goes off for a bigger explosion. A strong source of anti-air or platform pressure, it's kept in check by its above-average startup and significant end lag. Whatever you do, don't miss. Then Impa's down smash comes from her 2nd strong attack, having her short hop in place and fling a set of throwing knives beneath her that stick in the ground for 1 hit, then explode for a 2nd. An unconventional move that works best at catching get-up options, or when you predict your opponent might throw out a down tilt or other low attack that you can go over with the jump. Each clone you have on hand adds an additional kunai to the mix, giving this move even more range. Now for Impa's aerials. Starting with an original neutral air animation where Impa tucks her arm in and performs a quick frontward slash with a slight downward angle, then spins around and does the same thing behind her. This move benefits a lot from having clones, as the first clone adds hitboxes above Impa's that give the move less of a blind spot, while the 2nd and 3rd add their own slashes on the opposite side, covering both sides of Impa for both hits if you have at least 2 clones. An increasingly better coverage move the more clones are on hand, but with the downside of not hitting until about frame 10, slow enough to be ineffective at breaking out of pressure. Fortunately, her forward air is a little faster, consisting of a broader slash with a rising diagonal arc. It's fairly quick for the range it has, doing okay damage and comboing into stuff reliably at low to mid percents, while also serving as Impa's best option out of shield. If you have 2 or more clones, their additional hit comes out at a slightly steeper angle for added visual flair. Impa's back air is another move adapted from specifically the second hit of her first strong attack, a forceful stab straight back. Not only is it decently fast for a disjoint, this is her strongest aerial knockback-wise and one of her best kill moves. Well, if you can land it. It's a stab with a short sword, so the hitbox is pretty small and narrow, which is where clones come in handy, as they add extra hitboxes above and below that make it less of a hassle to connect with. Impa's up air takes her mid-air weak attack and flips it to aim above herself instead of forward. A front flip kick that covers overhead, it's a much bigger hitbox than Sheik's or Greninja's up airs, and while its damage is unremarkable and won't kill until late, it combos into things at low percents and becomes an increasingly better juggling tool at any percent if you have enough clones to add a second hit that makes the move even more active. Then Impa's down air comes from her mid-air strong attack, a stall and fall stab with the usual role of being a situational mix-up. It stands out because any clone she has appear at her sides and make its range wider than any other move of this type. It even has a notably strong landing hitbox, though it's got a ton of lag after you land, so it's still very punishable on shield, and it's also unable to spike. Impa's grab game starts out pretty conventionally. Her grab animations are all the usual, but her pummel makes things interesting, performing a quick chop with her free hand that hits the general vicinity of the opponent's shoulder, followed immediately by any available clones copying it for additional hits. Depending on how many clones you have, this could be the weakest pummel in the game damage-wise, or the strongest. Then for her forward throw, Impa shoves the enemy away forcefully with one hand. Her back throw has her teleport behind the opponent and send them flying with a powerful slash based on specifically the first part of her first strong attack. And as you probably guessed, it's a kill throw, though not until higher percents. Impa's up throw shoves her victim upward instead of forward. Pretty simple. But her down throw has her quickly lift the enemy with both hands and slam them against the ground with just one, dealing low enough knockback to be a reliable combo throw up through around 70%. Having such a good pummel and combo starter makes grab mix-ups a big part of Impa's game plan. Finally, some extra details, like having Impa's get-up attack pull from the animation of her running strong attack by having her take off her hat, deploy an ancient energy blade hidden inside it, and swing it around her as she gets back to her feet. Your move, odd job. And how about a few taunts, like one where she beckons her opponent on while performing a flourish with her kodachi, one where she does a set of stereotypical ninja hand seals, and one where she kneels for a brief moment and attempts to meditate mid-combat. And now, what self-respecting ninja would be without a set of special techniques to fall back on? Let's see just what this one has kept hidden until now. As shown previously, Impa has the ability to generate clones of herself to augment her attacks. But how does she create them in the first place? Well, that's where her neutral special comes in. In Age of Calamity, Impa has the ability to mark a nearby enemy with a runic symbol. If she defeats that enemy or lands a strong attack on them, she absorbs the symbol and uses it to create her clones. And in Smash, she could do the same thing, with some alterations to account for the different style of combat. Upon use, Impa releases a fast-moving pulse of ancient energy that expands in a circle around her to about a dash length on all sides. The first enemy the pulse touches gets marked by the energy, shown by one of 3 translucent symbols floating above their head for, let's say, about 12 seconds. If Impa manages to deal a certain amount of damage to that enemy or KO them before the symbol disappears, she absorbs its energy and forms a clone out of it. Marking an enemy deals no damage or knockback, but doing so has a fast animation, so you can slip it in while moving around in neutral or advantage states. Needless to say, applying symbols and targeting marked enemies to generate clones is a crucial part of Impa's game plan. Understanding when to tag an opponent and how to capitalize on it quickly to gain a clone and keep the pressure on would be a major part of her learning curve, especially the latter, since the damage required to absorb a symbol would go up the more clones you have in order to account for them increasing your damage output. The clones themselves also only last about, let's say, around 20 seconds before they all disappear at once unless you create another and reset the timer. So you want to be actively seeking out chances to use this move at all times. Though if you have a full set of 3 clones, you can't generate any more symbols. Better make the most out of them while you can. Now we know how Impa's clones come about, but how else can they affect her moveset? Well, her side special is interesting in that regard. Impa's 3rd and 4th weak attacks in Age of Calamity have her summon a cluster of paper talismans, then tap into them to unleash a gust of wind directly ahead. We'll be tapping into this ourselves, with something extra thrown in. On use, Impa generates the talismans in front of her in the same fashion. After about 40 frames, or 2/3 of a second, she activates the talismans, creating the same gust of wind that covers a little more than a platform length forward. Sure, it sounds simple, but the wind deals 3 hits in total for some effective shield pressure and deals pretty substantial knockback at the end, making it a legitimate KO option at the ledge. But if you have any clones on hand, then it gets interesting, because instead of Impa staying in place to activate the talismans, her clones gather on the spot to handle it instead, allowing Impa herself to move around freely and capitalize on the stage control or try to convert off the wind if it hits. Wind Seal varies from a simple ledge/landing trap to a full-on control tool not entirely unlike Zelda's Phantom Slash, depending on if you have a clone available. As you see, using your neutral special well doesn't just make your regular attacks stronger, it also lets your side special do things it normally couldn't. Though when your clones split off to activate the seal, your A moves function as if you don't have any clones temporarily, making potential follow-ups weaker and potential kill confirms harder to land. Unlike the two so far, Impa's up special isn't affected by however many clones she has. Instead, it's something a little different for a recovery move. Certain situations in Age of Calamity, like finishing specific attack strings or jumping off a wall, allow Impa to deploy a sailcloth and glide through the air to traverse the battlefield more freely. For our version here, she pulls out that same sailcloth and uses a talisman to create a burst of wind at her feet that propels her up and slightly forward. From there, holding left or right allows Impa to glide in that direction. The initial launch goes about as far as Mario's super jump punch, but gliding afterward lets you go much further horizontally, reaching airspeeds on par with the best in the game as long as the cloth is out, and reaching that max speed very quickly. But more importantly, you can cancel out of the glide with an attack, jump, or dodge, and you don't go into freefall afterward, though you still can't use another special until you land. While this move's vertical recovery isn't that great, and its horizontal recovery takes time to fully utilize, it makes up for it in the movement mix-ups it allows off stage. Use it in conjunction with your double jump and other aerial movement to play mind games and make yourself tough to edge guard. Though you kinda have to be tricky with it, since the only hitbox is on the wind at the beginning, and all the hang time in the world won't save you if you've been hit so far low and away and you can't climb high enough to make it back. And to be clear, this wouldn't be like Brawl freeform gliding. This would be more like Breath of the Wild and Age of Calamity, where you move forward while slowly descending. So just what does Impa have up her sleeve for her down special? As it turns out, something pretty big. Impa's special attacks in Age of Calamity form ancient energy into the shape of explosive barrels that blow up any enemy in range. And if she has a full set of 3 symbols, she sacrifices all of them to create an even stronger version with multiple barrels. On use, Impa directs one available clone to leap forward at full hop height. At the apex of the jump, the clone transforms into one of the aforementioned barrels and begins to fall in an arc while maintaining its forward momentum. Once it hits the ground, a platform, any non-friendly fighter or object, or falls a great enough distance, the barrel explodes. With the blast radius of Link's remote bombs and greater power, it's a legitimate threat that enemies must respect, but one with a cost since it requires sacrificing a clone to use. Though if you have a full set of 3 clones, then using this move has all 3 leap ahead at different angles and transform, coming down with a chain of 3 explosions that covers a very wide area. Clone Bomb works as emergency stage control, a way of disrupting campy opponents, or an edge-guarding tool against linear recoveries. But since using it means leaving yourself slightly weaker afterward, knowing when to use it without getting too trigger-happy is key. Also worth going for if your clone's timer is about to run out and you don't think you'll be able to absorb a symbol in time. Oh, and if you don't have any clones, this move just fails, but you probably guessed that. So what do we do for Impa's final smash? Well, for her ultimate technique, we'll take the core themes of her moveset and tune them up to levels truly worthy of a Sheikah warrior. Stealing herself, Impa lunges forward with a decisive slash that stuns anyone in its path. If it does manage to catch someone, Impa then channels the Smash Ball's immense power and uses it to conjure a small army's worth of clones. Okay, maybe like 10, but you get the idea. All at once, Impa and the clones vanish, followed by the clones rematerializing around their helpless foes one by one, each delivering an attack as they come in, and each appearing more quickly than the last, ramping up the intensity with each hit. Then Impa reappears and stands before her targets, silently brandishes her blade, and delivers a final slash so powerful it leaves a trail of light behind that itself explodes for a finishing blow. This is what Impa could be like in Smash. the latest in a line of royal protectors and a beloved advisor and friend who faced and survived a living calamity. Through her finely honed skills and mastery of ancient arts that blur the lines of magic and technology, she fights to save Hyrule and its people with a method all her own. Impa is at her strongest when combining her array of combos and strings with conditionally high damage to outpace anything her opponents can manage. With strong mobility in all aspects, she has little trouble positioning herself where she wants to weave around attacks and poke at opponents before retreating to safety. And her moveset gains both power and versatility if she has clones backing her up, turning her into an even greater threat. However, Impa also needs her clones and the buffs they give her, and getting the ball rolling when none are present can prove to be difficult. Her ability to finish enemy stocks is inconsistent, as her best options to do so are either slow and committal or difficult to use, if not impossible, if she doesn't have clones available. And the way said clones function means she is required to fight aggressively at all times to keep her momentum going. Even though she's a hit-and-run fighter, she still can't afford to play too slowly or too patiently. Well, that was different. I went into this wanting to create a concept that do justice for a well-regarded character and feel like a distinct take on an archetype we've seen before. Guess it's a good thing the symbols and clones her Age of Calamity moveset is built around made it so easy. There were even a few things that didn't make it into the final moveset. I looked into the Sheikah eye snare thing from her C5 for her side special before deciding it wouldn't look right in a side-scroller setting, and I considered working in the giant frog she summons for certain attacks, only to decide they were a bit too much and I'd be better off focusing on other things. I also looked into having the stun on her final smash be done with a stasis rune, but I passed on it since the only reason Impa can use stasis in Age of Calamity is because of a certain someone who wasn't there originally. While the situation for Impa herself is rather precarious because of the recent Spirit event, the Zelda series as a whole might actually be in a good spot to break its newcomer drought. It'll depend on if the Breath of the Wild sequel is ready soon enough that the Smash team feels confident in pulling a character from it without worrying about it changing details about its characters. But I don't know, there's reason to be cautiously optimistic. But what do you think about this situation as a whole? Thoughts on the lack of Zelda newcomers for so long? Is there anyone from the series you'd like to see join Smash, or like to see featured here as a challenger? Special thanks to the following people for helping make this video happen. Thanks in particular to my patrons for their continued support. And if you're interested in sponsoring these videos yourself, I'd greatly appreciate it. So, until next time, here's hoping this year turns out to be less of a calamity in the long run.